In the icy mountains of Idaho, a 15-year-old girl discovers a dying wild Mustang with a shattered leg, abandoned, hunted, and on the verge of death. But instead of walking away like the world always had, she knelt beside it. No one knew this silent act of compassion would awaken something ancient, a forgotten bond, a miracle in the making. And 15 years later, that same horse or its legacy would return in a way that would silence a town and rewrite everything they thought they knew about wildness, loyalty, and the soul of the land. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. Bitterroot Valley, Idaho, lay blanketed under a cruel winter sky, its vast expanse of pine-draped hills and frozen creeks shrouded in thick snow and silence. The air held the bite of a late December storm, and a low howl swept through the forest like a whisper of something forgotten. It was the kind of night that kept doors locked and chimneys full, where the wind carved shapes into the drifts and frost etched ferns onto the glass. But even in this raw stillness, there were lives moving. One of them was a girl in a too-thin coat, trudging behind her father into the trees. Eliza Monroe, 15, with a long braid of auburn hair swinging against her back and boots 2 sizes too big, had the kind of soul that bent toward the wild. She was tall for her age, gangly in the way colts are before they find their legs, with sharp gray eyes that missed nothing. Her cheeks were red from windburn and quiet fire, and she kept her head down as the snow bit at her lashes. Eliza didn't talk much, didn't need to. Her thoughts were often louder than words, and tonight, her thoughts were with her mother. They hadn't spoken her name aloud in months. Mary Ann Monroe had been a veterinarian, the only one for 50 miles, and as skilled with a horse's broken leg as she was with a scared child's heart. When cancer took her the previous spring, it left a silence in their cabin that even the howling wind couldn't fill. Eliza had picked up her mother's old notebook 2 weeks after the funeral and began drawing the animals she remembered her mother healing. Horses, coyotes, once even an injured bobcat. That quiet sketchbook had become her refuge, and every page whispered, "Remember." Ahead, her father's voice barked against the cold. "Stay close, Lise. We ain't got time to chase deer tonight." His boots crunched through the crusted snow, moving with a practiced rhythm. Cole Monroe was a stocky man in his late 40s, built like a boulder, with a black beard streaked in gray and shoulders bowed by too many winters. A retired forest ranger turned subsistence farmer, he was known around Elkhorn County for being blunt and capable. The kind of man who could track a cougar through sleet but couldn't talk about feelings if his life depended on it. Since Mary Ann died, his silence had deepened into something colder, something jagged. His grief didn't weep, it built fences. "We just need kindling," he said. "Storm's gonna push in harder after midnight." The woods around them were skeletal with frost. The tall pines creaked in the wind, their boughs shedding snow and heavy sighs. The sharp tang of pine resin clung to the air, mixing with the distant call of a hawk. Their breath puffed in short bursts as they crossed a frozen gully, descending toward the creek. That's when Eliza saw it. Near the edge of the water, where the snow thinned into icy mud, a dark mass lay half-buried beneath broken branches. Her steps slowed, heart thudding. It looked like a fallen log at first, until a gust of wind lifted the tangled mane. She ran ahead before her father could stop her. "It's a horse," she called out, breathless. "Dad, it's a Mustang." Cole reached her in 4 long strides and pulled her back. "Don't touch it yet." He crouched low, brushing snow from the creature's flanks. The horse was a mare, coal black with a blaze of white right between her eyes and at least 14 hands high. Her chest rose and fell shallowly. One leg, her front right, was twisted unnaturally beneath her. "She's wild," Cole muttered, inspecting the injury. "Must have broken through the ice upstream. Damn leg's done." Eliza knelt beside him, her gloved fingers trembling as she hovered over the horse's damp mane. Despite the cold, the animal's coat was warm, not yet dead. Her eyes were half open, dark and glassy but not empty. "She's still alive." "She won't be for long," Cole said, standing. "Even if she makes it through the night, no way that leg heals right. She's suffering. We should put her down." "No." Eliza rose, blocking his view with her arms outstretched. "Please, Dad, let's take her back. Just try, please." Cole stared at his daughter. Her face was wind-burned, eyes wide with a kind of pleading that cracked his spine. It wasn't just pity, it was fire. And something in it, Marianne's fire maybe, brought him to a long silence. He cursed under his breath. If she lashes out or dies on the trail, it's on you. Eliza didn't nod. She just turned, already removing her scarf to wrap around the mare's head. They worked in silence. Cole cut tree branches to fashion a makeshift sled, while Eliza stayed by the Mustang's side, murmuring softly. The horse didn't move, but her ear twitched at the sound of Eliza's voice. It took nearly an hour to roll her onto the sled. The process made her whimper once, a sharp, painful breath, and then fall silent again. Strong, Cole admitted. She should have been gone by now. As they made their way home, the sky split open. Snow came sideways, a wall of white swallowing the trees. Eliza walked beside the sled, shielding the horse with her body as best she could, her coat soaked through, boots slipping on the ice. Cole led the way with one hand on the rope, the other clutching his rifle. By the time they reached the cabin, the wind was shrieking like banshees through the pines. The windows glowed orange with lantern light. They didn't take the horse into the barn. Cole waved Eliza toward the old trapper's shed behind the house, long unused but dry and enclosed. Together, they dragged the sled inside and laid the mare onto a bed of hay and burlap sacks. Eliza lit a lamp, the soft yellow glow flickering against the plank walls. "She can stay one night," Cole said gruffly. "Then we see." Eliza knelt by the Mustang again, placing her hand on the mare's neck. "You're safe now," she whispered. "You're not going to die out here." The mare didn't reply, but her eye flickered once, and her breath came steady, warm against the girl's hand. The storm raged well into the early hours, pelting the roof of the old trapper's shed with sleet and wind. But inside, the world was still. The mare lay curled on her good side, covered in a quilt Eliza had dragged from a forgotten trunk in the attic. A lantern hung from a nail above them, its weak flame casting long shadows that flickered with each gust of wind. By the time morning came, Bitterroot Valley had disappeared under another 8 inches of snow. The trees stood coated in frost, heavy like statues frozen mid-breath. Cole was already out chopping wood by the time Eliza slipped from her room, pulling on her worn coat and sliding the latch on the back door as quietly as possible. She didn't go to the kitchen or check the barn. Instead, she crossed the backyard to the shed, her boots crunching over the crusted snow, her breath coming out in tight clouds. Inside, the mare still breathed, slow, steady, fragile. "I'm back," Eliza whispered, kneeling beside her. "You made it through the night." She studied the animal's face. Her coat was glossy black, dulled only by the dried mud and blood that still clung to her side. That white blaze between her eyes almost formed a diamond. Her eyes, striking golden brown and rimmed with long lashes, were half-lidded but watching. "You're not just a horse," Eliza murmured, running her hand gently along the mare's neck. "You're someone." She thought for a long time before saying aloud, "I'm going to call you Sammy." It was a name her mother had used once for an old quarter horse they helped rescue from a wildfire. Marianne had said it meant God heard, and Eliza thought that felt right. If anyone had been heard last night, it was Sammy. Eliza returned to the house briefly, grabbing a few supplies, a water bottle, an old bandage roll, and a tin of oats. She hesitated in the hallway, then quietly opened the glass cabinet near the living room. Her mother's medical kit still stood untouched inside. It smelled faintly of rubbing alcohol and lavender. Eliza's fingers trembled as she pulled out the bottle of antiseptic and a small syringe of pain relief, careful not to disturb the rest. Back in the shed, she gently cleaned Sammy's wound, dabbing the area with warm water and applying the antiseptic as the horse flinched only slightly. She unwrapped the torn, makeshift bandage from the night before and examined the leg more closely. It was swollen and discolored, but the bone didn't seem shattered. With care, it might heal, though not perfectly. Eliza remembered her mother's lesson. Wild animals have a stronger will to live than most humans ever understand. "I'll take care of you," she said. "I promise." Every night that week, Eliza returned to the shed after dinner. While Cole and their uncle were inside by the fire, arguing about whether to sell the old truck or fix it, Eliza would sneak out under the guise of feeding the chickens or checking the firewood pile. In truth, she was tending to Sammy, cleaning the wound, feeding her soaked oats and crushed apples, and talking softly into the dark. Sammy never neighed or panicked. Instead, she listened. Sometimes she would shift her ears at the sound of Eliza's voice, and when the girl rested her hand on her flank, Sammy's breathing would slow. It was a quiet companionship, built not with rope or reins, but with trust. The only other person in the house besides Eliza and Cole was Eliza's uncle, Mitch Monroe. In his late 50s, Mitch was Cole's older brother, a wiry man with a smoker's rasp and a permanent squint that made him look suspicious, even when he wasn't. He had lived with them since losing his job as a logging truck driver a year ago, and though he didn't speak much, he was always watching from the corner of a room. Mitch was the kind of man who counted firewood stacks and knew when something was missing from the pantry. Eliza didn't trust him to understand Sammy. One evening, as she slipped back into the house, she nearly ran into him in the mudroom. He squinted at her, arms crossed over his flannel shirt. "You've been out a lot this week," he said. "In this weather, no less." Eliza forced a smile. "Just feeding the hens. You know how they scream if I'm late." He grunted, unconvinced but unwilling to press further. "Don't catch cold. Ain't nothing out there worth freezing over." But Eliza knew better. There was something out there worth every freezing breath. A life depending on her. By the end of the second week, Sammy had begun shifting her weight. Her appetite returned, and her coat shone brighter under the lantern light. Eliza began to draw her, sketch after sketch, in her mother's old journal. Each image caught a different moment. The tilt of Sammy's head, the strength in her neck, the gentleness in her stare. She wrote about their secret, about how Sammy had started to whinny softly when she entered the shed, about how her golden eyes followed Eliza's every move. In school, Eliza stayed quiet, drifting through her days like a ghost, but her heart was always in the shed. In her biology class, she asked the teacher questions about equine recovery rates and tendon damage. Mr. Grantham, a young and enthusiastic man with a buzz cut and sleeves always rolled to the elbows, praised her curiosity. "Thinking of vet school?" he asked one afternoon, raising a brow. "Maybe," Eliza replied. "Someone has to take care of the wild ones." That night, a new idea tugged at her. If Sammy could heal, if she could stand and walk again, maybe she wouldn't have to hide forever. Maybe she could run. And maybe, just maybe, Eliza could be the one to help her remember how. But even as hope blossomed, so did fear. One morning, Mitch came into the kitchen holding an empty antiseptic bottle. "This you?" he asked, voice flat. Eliza's blood turned cold. "No. Maybe it spilled when the cabinet fell last week?" Mitch stared at her for a long moment, then dropped the bottle into the trash. "You'd best be careful with Mom's old stuff. Ain't meant for games." That night, Eliza wrapped Sammy's leg tighter than usual. She sat beside the mare for over an hour, whispering stories of her mother and her dream to one day work in Yellowstone. Sammy blinked slowly, breathing warm air into the girl's palm. They were two survivors. Two quiet hearts in a noisy world, and for now, their secret remained safe. Winter deepened its grip on Bitterroot Valley, layering the world in silence and steel. The snow crunched like old bones beneath boots, and the breath of each soul, human or animal, came out in puffs of silver mist. From the town square to the farthest ridges, tension hung heavier than snow clouds. And in the corners of that frozen hush, a quiet threat had begun to rise. It started with whispers, talk of ruined fences, trampled gardens, and apple orchards stripped clean. By the third week of January, the rumors had sharpened into anger. The Mustangs were back. The wild herds that once roamed high in the hills had descended early this year. Starving and desperate, they came in thick groups to the lower valley, their hooves cracking frozen earth, their breath steaming. They weren't welcome, not anymore. On a cold Tuesday morning, Cole Monroe stood at the edge of town beside a dozen other men as Mayor Ray Branson made his announcement. The mayor wore a broad leather coat and a Stetson that hadn't seen dirt in years. He was a tall man in his 60s, with a thick salt-and-pepper mustache and skin tanned like rawhide. He didn't smile often, and when he did, it was usually for a camera. His eyes were quick, sharp, and cold. "There's a herd tearing through the southern fields," Branson said, his voice echoing off the frosted walls of the community hall. "They've taken out 3 pastures and nearly spooked old Collins' cattle into the river. That's over 10 grand in losses, We can't afford another winter like this." The crowd murmured. Cole, hands in his coat pockets, kept his face neutral. "We're putting together a patrol," Branson continued. "Anyone who brings in one of the Mustangs, alive or dead, gets 500 cash, preferably dead. Let's thin the herd before they hit the main crop zones." A murmur of approval rippled through the gathering. Branson held up a photo. Grainy, shot from a distance but unmistakable. A dark horse, black as midnight, with a white blaze between the eyes. "This one's been seen twice near McKinley Ridge. She's big, fast, could be a lead mare. Bring her down, and that bounty doubles." Cole felt the chills slide deeper into his spine. Back at the Monroe cabin, Eliza sat on the floor of the shed, watching as Sammy tried her first full step. The mare's leg was still wrapped in layers of gauze and old flannel, but the swelling had gone down and the stiffness in her gait had softened. She shifted, stumbled, steadied. Eliza held her breath. "You did it," she whispered. Sammy's ears flicked toward her. The mare took another step, her nostrils flaring, then exhaled with a huff that looked almost triumphant. Outside the shed, hidden by the thickets along the fence line, Mrs. Leary paused mid-stride. A retired schoolteacher with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue, she had lived alone on the neighboring property for 20 years. Her pale gray hair was always tucked under a wool cap, and her long overcoat made her resemble a sentry rather than a grandmother. She'd taught generations of Bitterroot's children, including Cole, and she still thought of the world in grades and penalties. Mrs. Leary squinted through the broken slats in the shed's wall. She had seen Eliza sneak out at all hours, had watched her cart water and blankets through the snow. Now she tilted her head and saw a flicker of dark movement, an ear, a tail twitch. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She turned on her heel and began the long walk back to her house. That night at dinner, Cole said nothing about the mayor's bounty. He'd barely spoken all week, his mind a clutter of unease. But when Eliza caught him watching her over the potatoes, his gaze lingered longer than usual. After dinner, he followed her as she slipped her coat back on and headed for the shed. "You've been out here a lot," he said quietly from the doorway. Eliza froze. Her hand was on the latch. "Just feeding the chickens." "You check the chickens 5 times a night?" She turned toward him, the wind catching her braid. "Sometimes I just like the quiet." He stepped into the snow beside her. "You remember when you were 7 and tried to sneak that injured rabbit into the bathroom?" She blinked. "You found it when it chewed through Mom's towel." He chuckled softly. "I thought she'd skin us both." They stood in silence for a moment, the cold creeping up their sleeves. "I know there's something out here," Cole finally said. "And I think I know what." Eliza's breath caught. "I'm not mad," he said, looking past her to the shed. "But you have to be careful. Word is there's a herd causing damage up near McKinley Ridge. People are spooked. There's a bounty now, $500, more for a black mare with a white blaze." Eliza's knees nearly gave out. "She hasn't hurt anyone. She was hurt. She was dying." "I believe you," he said. "But not everyone will." They stood in silence, snow falling in soft flakes around them. "Come on," he finally said. "Show me." Inside the shed, Sammy stood slowly as the door creaked open. Her head lifted, ears twitching. She didn't bolt or shy away. Cole, silent as stone, stepped closer and knelt beside her. He ran a calloused hand down her neck, then paused at the bandaged leg. "You've done good work," he murmured. "She's smart," Eliza whispered, "and she listens." He met his daughter's eyes. "Then we keep her safe, but we've got to be clever. That means no more walks alone, no more medicine without me, and if anyone asks, she doesn't exist." Eliza nodded, tears stinging her eyes. Back across the road, behind a curtain, Mrs. Leary watched the shed flicker with lantern light. Her eyes narrowed. She had seen enough strange things in her life to know a secret when she saw one. And secrets, especially the 4-legged kind, had a way of turning entire towns upside down. The shed was no longer enough. Sammy's healing had accelerated, and though her legs still bore the tension of each step, the mare now moved more freely, even eager at times to stretch her limbs. Eliza had started leaving the shed door open longer at night so the horse could sniff the air, her body trembling slightly at the scent of snow and pine carried in on the breeze. But it wasn't safe anymore. With townsfolk stirred by the bounty, and Mrs. Leary's watchful eyes growing sharper by the day, Eliza knew it was only a matter of time before someone saw something they weren't supposed to. So that evening, under the gathering clouds of another storm, Eliza did the one thing she feared most. She told her father the full truth. They sat on the back steps of the house, the snow packed hard beneath their boots. Cole was sharpening a hatchet, its edge glinting orange in the sunset. Eliza's breath clouded in front of her, her heart hammering like a drum. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "She's not just a horse. She's a Mustang. I found her on the ridge after the last snowstorm. She was dying. I couldn't leave her." Cole didn't look up. The rasp of steel on stone filled the silence for a few seconds before he set the blade down and turned to face her. His face was unreadable. "I already knew." Eliza blinked. "I saw the hoofprints the night of the storm," he said. "I knew they weren't from our stock. Then I found the bandages missing. Your mother's old kit disturbed. I just wasn't ready to believe it." "I'm sorry," Eliza said. "I know it was dangerous, but I couldn't let her die." At last, Cole sighed, rubbing his hand through his thick beard. He looked older than he had the week before. "Come on," he said. "Show me properly." They walked together in the pale dusk, snow crunching underfoot. Sammy stood in the shed, her dark coat gleaming, her breath rising in warm puffs. When she saw Eliza, she nickered softly and stepped forward, her leg only slightly stiff. Then she noticed Cole and froze. Her ears tilted back slightly, her muscles taut with uncertainty. Cole stepped slowly into the space, careful not to make sudden movements. He crouched by the far wall and studied the mare for a long moment, eyes tracing the scar along her flank, the white blaze down her forehead. "She's magnificent," he murmured. "Strong heart." Eliza said nothing, watching her father closely. He stood and reached out his hand, palm up. Sammy hesitated, then after a few moments stepped forward and nuzzled it. In that moment, something shifted in Cole's eyes. "When I was 19, he said softly, "I worked 2 summers as a backcountry ranger up in Flathead. One morning I found a young buck caught in a steel trap. Its leg was mangled. Most guys would have put it down, but I didn't. I carried him back to the ranger station, fed him, dressed his leg. For weeks I kept him alive." "What happened?" Eliza asked. "He ran. Never saw him again, but I like to think he made it." Cole turned to look at his daughter. "You've got that same spirit your mother had. Always believed every creature was worth the fight." He glanced back at Sammy. "We'll need a better shelter." The next morning, they got to work. Together. The old chicken coop behind the barn had been unused for over a year. They spent 2 days clearing it out, removing the broken beams, laying new straw, patching the wind-battered roof with a tarp Cole found in the workshop. They built a partition inside with hay bales to keep Sammy warm at night. Cole even dug a trench along the side to divert any melting snow. Each task brought father and daughter closer, not just in purpose, but in understanding. Over lunch, Cole taught Eliza how to spot animal signs in the snow. The split pattern of elk hooves, the drag of a fox's tail, the round, steady stamp of a bear. She soaked it in, hungry for everything. "You see the way the snow curves here?" he said, crouching by a set of prints. "That's how you tell if the animal was limping or steady. Look for weight shift." Eliza nodded, mimicking his gesture. "Like how Sammy leans more on her left side." He smiled. "Exactly." They didn't talk much about what would happen when Sammy was fully healed. But one night, as they sat by the fire, Cole finally said it. "She can't stay here." Eliza's shoulders tensed. "If we keep her, someone will find out, and if Branson's men come snooping, they won't ask questions." "I know," Eliza whispered. "I just thought maybe she could stay longer." "She'll know when it's time," Cole said. "And when she goes, we'll help her find her way back to the hills." That night, Eliza crept to the coop, her sketchbook in hand. She sat beside Sammy, who lay curled in the fresh straw, eyes half closed in calm. "I don't know how I'll let you go," she whispered. Sammy blinked slowly, then stretched out her neck, resting her muzzle lightly against Eliza's arm. "I promise we'll find you a safe way home, somewhere you won't have to hide." And in the quiet, the cold wind rattling softly against the walls, Eliza felt something stronger than fear settle in her chest. It was resolve. The frost came heavier that week, a white crust layering every branch and fence post in the Bitterroot Valley. Even the coop's sturdy roof crackled each morning with new ice. But inside the shelter, a different kind of warmth was growing. steadier than the fire they built each night, deeper than the hay they laid thick beneath the mare. Eliza first noticed it during feeding. Sammy had started eating more and slower. She wasn't as restless. She didn't pace the way she used to. Instead, she stood longer after meals, head slightly lowered, her breath softer. At first, Eliza thought the mare was simply relaxing, healing from the wound, finally at peace. But then one evening, as she brushed the horse's coat under the flickering lantern, her hand paused at the mare's belly. It was rounder than it had been just days before, firm, tense, alive. Eliza's breath caught. The next morning, she dragged Cole out to the coop. Sammy stood chewing gently, her eyes calm, tail swaying idly behind her. "She's different," Eliza said. "Her sides are swelling. Look." Cole crouched low, his eyes narrowing. He ran a careful hand along Sammy's flank. The mare twitched but didn't shy away. He moved to her underside, then back again. A long silence passed before he spoke. "She's not just healing," he murmured. "She's pregnant." Eliza blinked, stunned. "Are you sure?" "I'd bet my last coffee ration. She's carrying. Late term, too. Could be a few weeks, maybe sooner." Eliza stepped back, gripping the edge of the stall. Sammy turned her head to look at her. In those amber eyes, so familiar now, Eliza didn't see panic, only endurance. "How is that even possible?" she asked. Cole stood. "She must have been with the herd before the storm, probably bred naturally. Maybe that's why she got left behind, injured and pregnant. The other Mustangs wouldn't wait." Eliza's heart twisted. "We can't let her go now." Cole didn't answer right away. He scratched the back of his neck and looked out toward the horizon, where snow clouds rolled low over the treetops. "I wasn't planning to," he said. That night, Eliza stayed up late, digging through boxes in the attic until she found what she needed, her mother's old veterinary textbooks. Dusty, brittle at the edges, but still intact. She carried them to the living room and spread them across the rug, flipping through chapters by lantern light. Gestation periods, birthing positions, warning signs, diagrams of foals in various stages. She read deep into the night, her lips moving with each word, memorizing. Cole joined her the next day. He'd pulled his old thermos from the garage and filled it with coffee. When Eliza showed him what she'd learned, he just nodded and handed her a notepad. "We'll make a checklist. Supplies, emergency signs, what we'll need if it turns bad." In the days that followed, they worked in quiet unison. The coop was reinforced again. Thicker straw, new tarp to block wind gaps, 2 buckets of warm water always ready. They lined a corner with clean blankets and hay, cleared space for movement. Cole brought home mineral supplements from the feed store under the guise of helping a neighbor's horse. Eliza crushed herbs she found from her mother's collection and added them to Sammy's meals. And they watched her. Every night, they took turns. Eliza sat with the mare until midnight, reading softly from her sketchbook or humming lullabies she barely remembered from childhood. Then Cole came, his heavy boots padding softly as he took her place with a quiet nod. Sammy learned their rhythm. She no longer flinched when Cole approached, even lowering her head when he arrived with a treat in his coat pocket. There was trust now, not just between girl and horse, but man and mare. One evening, as Eliza rested her head against Sammy's warm shoulder, she whispered, "You're not scared anymore, are you?" The mare's breath puffed gently, ruffling Eliza's braid. By the end of the week, another figure entered their circle. Sarah Bellamy was a traveling livestock inspector from Idaho, tall and wiry, with sharp blue eyes and freckles sprinkled across her cheeks. She had arrived in Bitterroot to audit the ranches affected by the recent Mustang sightings. Clad in a dark, waxed canvas coat and worn jeans, she walked with a limp, an old rodeo injury that hadn't dimmed her no-nonsense demeanor. People respected Sarah not just for her skill, but for her ability to keep secrets. Cole had known her years ago, back when he was still on the ranger team. When she spotted him across the general store's parking lot, she grinned. "Well, I'll be." "Cole Monroe still breathing?" "Sarah Bellamy," he said, returning the grin. "You haven't aged a minute." Liar. She stayed for coffee, and over the steam, Cole asked her carefully about wild births and foaling emergencies. Sarah's eyes narrowed. "You got a mare you're worried about?" "Something like that." She didn't push. But as she left, she handed him a folded sheet of notes with her number scribbled in the corner. "If you need help in a pinch, call me. No questions." That night, Cole tucked the paper inside his toolbox, just in case. Back in the coop, Eliza sat writing in her journal. She's close, I can feel it. Sometimes I press my ear to her belly, and I think I hear something, like a heartbeat in the snow. She drew a sketch of Sammy lying in the straw, her belly round and rising with each breath. Beneath it, a small shape curled within, a foal, safe and waiting. Outside, snow began to fall again, quiet, constant, like the ticking of time. The wind that swept through Bitterroot on that early spring morning had the sharp bite of winter's last breath. It rattled shutters, carried the scent of thawing pine needles, and stirred the frost still lingering along the creek beds. The Monroe house sat silent, save for the smoke curling lazily from the chimney, unaware, or perhaps too aware of what was coming. Eliza stirred awake to a hollow thump. Then came the bark of a dog, then boots, heavy, multiple, crunching across the frozen earth. She shot up from her mattress on the floor, her hair a tangle of auburn curls. She pulled back the curtain and froze. Outside, a line of men approached, the early sunlight glinting off barrels and badges. At the front, astride a pale gray gelding, rode Mayor Ray Branson. Tall and broad-chested, his beard was neatly trimmed and his brown hat sat squared on a head full of polished authority. He'd once been a rancher, until money and influence led him to the town hall. Ray's smile never reached his eyes, and in recent weeks, that smile had disappeared altogether. Bitterroot's rising tension over the Mustang herds had made him a man on a mission, and this morning, the Monroe property was his target. "Cole Monroe," he shouted, voice echoing down the hill like a rifle crack. "We've had reports of illegal harboring of protected wildlife. Step outside, now." Eliza stumbled back, heart racing. She grabbed her boots, her flannel coat, rushed to the kitchen, but the house was empty. Cole wasn't there. The back door swung open with a creak. Cold air rushed in. She ran through the snow, her breath forming ragged clouds, and burst into the coop. Empty. No Sammy, no foals, only the thick scent of hay and the faint warmth lingering in the straw. Eliza turned in a slow circle. In the far corner she spotted it. A single strand of black mane caught on a nail. A fresh hoofprint, half melted in the rising sun. She stumbled back outside just as Branson and 2 deputies stepped into the yard. "Where's your father?" Branson asked. Eliza didn't answer. He dismounted, his boots thudding heavily against the ground. "You're harboring wild horses, girl. There's been talk. Tracks near your property. Neighbor saw lights in that coop at all hours." "I don't know what you're talking about." He turned to a young deputy beside him. Cal Whitmer, barely 20, gangly with a nervous twitch in his jaw, stepped forward and unlatched the coop door. They entered together, rifles lowered. They found nothing but bedding, scattered fur, and indentations in the hay. Branson knelt and examined the hoofprints. "Fresh," he muttered. "She's been moved." Eliza clenched her fists. When Branson emerged again, his expression had darkened. "You tell your father," he said, stepping close enough for Eliza to smell the stale coffee on his breath, "that if I catch wind of even a tail flick, I'll be back with a warrant and more men. And next time, I won't be so polite." Then he turned and walked back to his horse. The posse followed. The sound of hooves faded into the trees, swallowed by the wind. Eliza stood frozen in the yard long after they were gone. Her legs trembled, not from cold, but from grief. Because deep down, she understood what had happened. Cole had moved them. Not just the foals, but Sammy too, and he hadn't told her. She found the note that evening. It was tucked into the old field journal her mother once used for wildlife sketches. The handwriting was rough, hurried. "Didn't want to wake you. It was time. She's ready. So are the little ones. I took them north. Same trail I used back in '85. Remember the old lean-to near Alder Creek? They'll be safe there. We'll talk when I'm back. Love you more than the mountain air, Dad." Eliza pressed the paper to her chest and let herself cry. It wasn't the kind of sobbing that shook the house. It was quiet, choked, a release she hadn't known she'd needed. That night, the house felt impossibly still. She went outside before bed, coat wrapped tight, and stared at the moonlit ridges to the north. Somewhere out there, Sammy was walking again. Strong, steady, with 3 foals at her side. She imagined her father beside them, guiding them past birch trees and melting streams through forgotten ranger paths no one else remembered. A lean-to from his days in the Forest Service still stood, miles into the high trail, where the trees grew thicker and no motor could reach. The same spot where he'd once rescued an injured owl during fire season. Eliza had heard the story 100 times, and now she knew why he'd told it. She whispered toward the mountains. "Stay hidden, stay safe." 10 years had come and gone, and Bitterroot Valley had aged with them. The pine forests still whispered in the wind, but the roads had been widened, the town signs repainted, and the once dirt trail to Elkhorn was now paved in gravel and lined with markers pointing to new hiking trails and preserved rangeland. But deep in the folds of the mountains, where the ridge lines met snow-fed streams, the wild remained untouched. And in that wilderness, something extraordinary had taken root. Dr. Eliza Monroe adjusted the strap of her canvas satchel as she stepped from the conservation truck and into the field. Now 24, Eliza had grown into a composed woman, tall with sun-bronzed skin and hair she wore tied in a practical low braid. Her eyes still held the same deep hazel flecks, but their gaze had sharpened with experience. She'd earned her DVM from the University of Montana and now worked in partnership with the Elkhorn Wildlife Coalition, heading a long-term behavioral study on wild mustangs in the Bitterroot backcountry. To the public, she was a young prodigy in animal behavior and ecosystem harmony. To those who knew her well, she was still the girl who had once whispered to a dying mare behind a weather-worn coupe. Today, she was returning to the place that haunted her dreams. The forest near Alder Creek had changed little, its trees thicker now, the underbrush denser from a decade of gentle rains and low human interference. Eliza moved quietly through the trees, her breath fogging in the cool spring air. She had tracked a herd over the past 6 months through GPS signals and field observations, but this morning was different. She'd seen them with her own eyes, just yesterday, near the foothills. 23 wild horses, grazing not on pasture land but within a narrow glen just above the Elkhorn ridgeline. What startled her was not just their proximity to human settlement, but how they behaved. "They protect," she whispered, jotting notes into a weatherproof notebook. "Unusual. One stallion stationed at perimeter, 2 mares circling juveniles. Pattern suggests defense formation, not herding." She had never seen that kind of coordination in any other wild Mustang group. And the leader, he was unlike any horse she'd ever documented, jet black from mane to hoof, except for a perfectly shaped white diamond in the center of his forehead. His eyes were bronze-flecked, intelligent, unflinching. He had stood between her and the herd the moment she appeared. Protective but not aggressive, she had not approached, respecting the unspoken boundary. But her heart had hammered wildly in her chest. Because she knew that face, not from photographs or books, but from memory. "I think you're hers," she said aloud, scanning the open field beyond the trees. She hadn't spoken of Sammy in years. After that spring morning raid, her father had never said much more. They both carried the memory quietly. Cole had passed 2 winters ago, peacefully in his sleep, a hand-carved horse figurine resting on the nightstand beside him. At the funeral, Eliza had worn a brooch shaped like a Mustang hoof. No one knew the meaning behind it. That was how she preferred it. Behind her, a voice called out, "Eliza!" She turned to see Dr. Sarah Lindstrom striding up the trail, clipboard in hand, her blonde hair pulled back beneath a navy blue cap. Sarah was Eliza's field partner, 10 years older, quick-witted, pragmatic. She stood about 5'10", lean from years of field work, with deep creases at the corners of her eyes from sun and long smiles. A childhood accident, falling from a barn loft, left her with a mild limp and a cautious way of walking. It made her measured in everything she did, from the way she phrased questions to how she interacted with the wild. "Found scat samples about 200 yards east," Sarah said, handing Eliza a sealed plastic bag. "Definitely Mustang, and fresh." Eliza nodded. "They're staying close, watching us." "You mean him?" Eliza glanced at her sharply. Sarah smiled, amused. "That black stallion. You keep writing about him like he's some kind of legend. Starting to wonder if he's the real subject of your research." Eliza didn't answer. She opened her journal instead, flipping to the drawing she'd made last night in her tent. The stallion, his strong chest, the streaked mane, the white star between his eyes. "I think he's the offspring of a mare I knew," she said at last. "Years ago, a black Mustang I helped. She had the same white mark, same build." Sarah raised a brow. Wild horses don't stick close to human settlements for long, especially ones that got hurt. Eliza's voice lowered. Not unless they choose to. They continued their survey for another hour, measuring hoof indentations, logging behavior with long-range binoculars, and collecting hairs caught in low brush. When they returned to the conservation truck, Eliza reviewed the trail camera data. One image stopped her cold. The black stallion was standing at the edge of a fence line near a crop field outside Elkhorn. A coyote was approaching the boundary. The stallion lowered his head and charged. The camera caught the moment the predator fled. No other Mustangs had followed. It had been a lone act of defense. Sarah leaned in over her shoulder. "You seeing what I'm seeing?" "They're protecting the village," Eliza said, not rating it. Sarah tapped her fingers on the dashboard. "We'll need to be careful. If this gets out..." "It won't," Eliza cut in. "I'm not releasing this data publicly, not yet." Sarah studied her friend for a long moment, then nodded. That night, Eliza sat alone beside a lantern-lit table in the field-based cabin and wrote until her fingers cramped. Observed herd continues to display protective behavior toward human settlement. Black stallion assumes leadership role. Temperament, alert, strategic, no signs of aggression unless provoked. Hypothesis forming, descendant of tamed or human-influenced lineage. Unknown if original mare Sammy is still alive. But signs of aged mare within herd suggest possibility. Then, beneath her notes, she added in careful handwriting, "If you're out there, I remember you. I kept my promise." The winds of early autumn rolled across Bitterroot Valley, stirring golden leaves from tall cottonwoods and whispering through the hollowed ravines like voices from another time. The small town of Elkhorn was quiet, settled into its rhythm of seasonal harvests and weekend markets. Yet, amidst the calm, a deeper story endured, spoken in firelight tales, carved in wooden plaques near the trailheads, and felt by those who wandered far enough into the forest to hear the silence break beneath a distant hoofbeat. Dr. Eliza Monroe, now in her mid-40s, had become a name spoken with respect across Idaho and the greater Northwest. But more than her accolades, her published papers on Mustang migratory behavior, her leadership in rewilding projects, it was the mystery that surrounded her connection to a certain herd of wild horses that truly captivated those who listened. And none listened more attentively than Hazel Reed, a 21-year-old student intern working under Eliza's mentorship for the past year. Hazel was slight in build, with a mess of unruly auburn curls and freckles that flared across her nose like constellations. She had an observant nature, the kind that absorbed everything before speaking. She'd grown up on the edge of the Flathead Reservation, raised by her grandmother after a car accident took her parents when she was 6. The loss had instilled in her a quiet resilience, a need to find meaning in wild places and creatures. Hazel stood beside Eliza that evening on Moonlight Ridge, a high clearing west of the Bitter Range, binoculars in hand. They had hiked for hours, stepping through early frost and the fading red of underbrush to reach this perch. Below them, the glade unfurled into layers of pine, broken only by a cluster of wild horses moving with serene precision through the mist. At the front was a mare, silver gray, her coat shimmering beneath the rising moon. Her mane was long, nearly white, and her eyes glinted with golden-brown flecks. She moved with regal control, stepping over stones and branches as if the earth itself bent to greet her hooves. Hazel lowered the binoculars. "She's beautiful. That's Luna, right?" Eliza nodded. "Yes, she took over the herd 2 years ago. Some say she's Star's descendant." "Star?" Eliza smiled. "That's what I called the stallion before Luna. A pure white blaze, black as coal otherwise. He led for over a decade. Some believe he was born just outside this forest. Some believe he remembered people." Hazel frowned slightly. "Do you think it's true, that these horses understand?" Eliza didn't answer right away. She crouched, pulling a small leather-bound notebook from her satchel. Its cover was weathered, edges frayed, the spine cracked from years of use. She turned it over in her hands before offering it to Hazel. "This was my journal," she said softly, "from when I was 15. Hazel's brows lifted. She took the journal, surprised by its weight, emotional more than physical. Eliza continued, her voice quieter than before. "I found a mare out here once, wounded, alone, scared. I hid her from everyone, even my own family. Her name was Sammy." Hazel looked up quickly. "The stories they tell in town?" The mother Mustang? Eliza chuckled. They turned her into a myth, said she led her herd into fire to save a foal, that she reappears in storms to protect lost hikers. But the truth is quieter. She was just a horse, a scared, wild thing with more strength in her than I ever had at that age. Hazel opened the first page of the journal. There, in uneven teenage handwriting, were the words, "Day 1, I think she might be dying, but I won't let her go alone." "I wrote every day," Eliza said. "Through the winter, through the birth of her foal. Through the night, we had to let her go. My father helped me get her to safety. He never said a word about it to anyone." Hazel traced the ink with her finger. "Why are you giving this to me?" Eliza's gaze turned toward the field. Luna was now standing on a ridge of stone, her silhouette cut against the silver moon. Behind her, the rest of the herd formed a crescent, like shadows guarding a sacred space. "Because I'm not going to be here forever," Eliza said gently, "and because there are things too sacred to publish, too fragile for public eyes." Hazel's eyes widened. "You mean the herd?" Eliza nodded. "They've changed. They don't act like the other wild horses anymore. They defend territory without overgrazing. They avoid towns. They migrate, but only along safe paths. I believe they've passed down learned behavior, generations of it." "And Sammy started it?" "I don't know," Eliza admitted, "but I believe it. And belief has power, Hazel, more than science sometimes. That's why I'm giving you this, to remind you to trust what can't be measured, to protect what the world might try to own." Hazel clutched the journal tightly. "You trust me with that?" Eliza placed a hand on her shoulder. "I do, because you see more than what's in front of you, because you've lost things, and that makes your heart strong. But most of all, because I need you to promise me something." Hazel nodded slowly. "Keep their secret. Keep it alive. Tell the story, but only to those who listen with more than ears. There are legends the world isn't ready to explain." That was the last time they stood together on Moonlight Ridge. Eliza passed away just 3 months later. A quiet illness that she'd kept hidden from all but a few close friends claimed her swiftly. She was 45. Her memorial was held in Elkhorn's town square. Children placed paper horses beneath the statue of a Mustang recently erected in her honor. Adults told stories of how she'd saved their livestock, rescued trapped deer, guided lost hikers home. But no one spoke of Sammy. No one spoke of the herd. Except Hazel. Now 29, Hazel Reed stood at the head of the Elkhorn Wildlife Trust, having dedicated the past 8 years to the preservation of the Bitterroot Corridor. She had trained new rangers, built bridges with local tribes, and published under Eliza's name to ensure her mentor's research would never be forgotten. But the journal she kept hidden. Only one night each month, when the moon hung full and low, she would return to Moonlight Ridge with a lantern and a folded blanket. And sometimes, if the wind stilled, the herd would appear, led by Luna, her silver coat shining like frost. And sometimes, Luna would whinny, a soft, low call that echoed through the trees. Hazel would listen, heart full, and whisper back, "We remember." Life is full of quiet miracles. Sometimes they come on 4 hooves in the snow. Sometimes they appear as a whisper in your heart when no one else believes. In this story, a broken Mustang found love, safety, and purpose through the heart of a young girl who simply chose to care. And through that simple act of compassion, a legend was born. Maybe that's how God works, in silence, in snow, in the small, brave decisions we make when no one is watching. Maybe his miracles aren't always thunder and fire. Sometimes they come in the shape of trust, in the warmth of a barn, in the eyes of a wild creature that learns to believe in people again. If this story touched something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that compassion can change the world. Leave a comment below and tell us your favorite part. And if you believe God still works through the simple and the small, type amen in the comments to stand with us. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to Stories of the Wild, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story of hope, healing, and the sacred connection between animals and humans. May God bless you and guide you in every act of kindness.